reality is, over the last 3 years, in terms of GDP growth, we have seen that the economy in terms of nominal growth has grown at $16 billion, right? In terms of that, what has been consumed by government growth itself is 98% over the last 3 years. So to put that into real terms, what that means is for every individual woman, man and child that we have in this country, that means that they have made $4,000 each, right? The government has consumed $3,920 of that in terms of new expenditure which they have spent on your behalf to try and get you the kind of outcomes that you want to have. The outrageous thing is that the negative team would have you believe that that has made better outcomes in healthcare, better outcomes in education, and better outcomes in the things that actually matter. Because what they said, what they came up here and said was that, well, it doesn't matter. We shouldn't front-load economic policies. The reason why is because all it is about your house, your second batch for the rich people, all of the good economic outcomes for you. The reality is what economic growth means, to front-load it, is not about the batch for the rich person. Look, in any society, rich people will do well. The reality about front-loading economic policies is not for the rich. It's for the poorest in our society. If you want to know what front-loading economic policies would do the most, you have to look to Otahu, you have to look to Manureira, you have to look to the poorest suburbs in our country, and you have to say economic growth would do them the most. So what do I want to talk about? I want to look at what the trajectory of policy has been over the last 2 years, and then I want to look at why we should particularly front-load economic policies. So let's look at it, right? In terms of gay marriage and in terms of social liberal reforms, we've seen over the last 25 years a progression towards more and more social liberalism, right? The question is, we think that's a good thing, right? The question is, what should we focus on the most? In terms over the same 25 years, we've seen in terms of economics, a regression in terms of that, right? We used to go from the position where we owned no banks to the fact where we now own a bank, right? We've gone from the fact of where we used to have the Employment Contracts Act to the fact that we now have the Employment Relations Act, right? We used to go from the fact that we had no railway to the fact that we do have a railway. But let's take economic... David found that funny. If we take the opposite, right? If we look at social reform, right? We've seen that the trajectory of social policy has been moving in favour of freedom, not away from freedom. And we see, if you look at marijuana, it's de facto decriminalised already. If you look at in terms of gay marriage, well, I don't think it is as good, but in fact, they've got civil unions, right? If the fact that you look across the board, you see that abortion, in terms of its trajectory, has been in terms of greater and greater freedoms for individuals to make choices. So what should ACT focus on? It should focus on the policy areas where we're actually going backwards, not the ones that we're going forwards in. So what I want to talk to you, though, about is to bring a different issue. Because obviously David talked about the fact that the government is really bad in the boardroom, right? But I want to talk about why the government is particularly bad and you don't actually realise why it's so bad, or the role that the government can play in educating people. I want to look in 2 ways government hides itself. First of all in terms of expenditure, and second of all in terms of taxation. We think in both ways they have pernicious effects that people don't actually realise the extent of harm that they perpetrate on individuals, and we think ACT plays a crucial role in terms of educating those people and why we think we should front load it in front of social policy. So the first one that I want to talk about is why government hides taxation, right? So we all think that taxation is bad in the sense, well, it is bad, but like in the sense that that the government collects tax and that is bad. But the reality is nobody in this room probably can accurately tell me their tax take, right? And the fact that government, except David Farrar, but nobody likes numbers that much. But the reality is that the government often taxes your income before you even see it. It uses businesses to tax it through GST, through income tax, before you ever get it in the hand. Look, in the 1990s, Rodney Hyde wanted to introduce a bill that said the government must send you a receipt of how much your expected taxation would be. What did the government do? It voted it down. Why? Because it doesn't want you to know how much it taxes you. The reality is is that the government wants to hide the amount of tax that it takes so it can actually increase that taxes. And this is what we have seen. This is why 98% of the growth over the last 3 years has been consumed by new government spending. But second of all, the tax that people think that it's dollar for dollar, right? So, sorry, this isn't actually going to be a particularly interesting point, but it is really important for the day. In the sense that what they do is they hide the cost of taxation. Because people often think if they take $1 off you, then they spend $1, and that's net fine, right? But the reality is that tax influences behaviour. Tax influences behaviour in two key ways. First, it means that people try and avoid taxation in the first place, and second, it means that people change their behaviour, so they don't work an extra hour, they take more leisure time, they don't go for promotion. The reality is that when you tax $1, the best estimates of the marginal taxation rate, or the marginal deadweight cost that imposes, is $1.40. So the reason is, $1.40. So the reason is, in that case, that when you tax $1, it doesn't mean that you get $1 in return. And the problem is when you have transfer programs, if people actually realise that, they'd actually realise the pernicious effect of government. The last thing that I want to talk about is expenditure and the hidden expenditure that you have. Right? So often government forces private businesses to take on its own behalf expenditure claims where it can't afford them themselves. So if you take the minimum wage, for example, there's two ways that you could achieve the ultimate ends of the minimum wage, which is $13, right? Either on the one hand, you can do as they do at the moment, get employers to pay the $13 to employees. Or you could say that the government should guarantee everybody a minimum income, right, of $13, and it should raise the revenue and tax people for that. But the problem is that when you actually realise, even if putting aside the facts of the problems that increased minimum wage has on in terms of employment, even if you put that aside, if you think that it's a good idea, what you should have is that when you realise that employers aren't actually wealthy, that both of them, so in the sense that not all employers are wealthy, right, and that you have some poor employers, the problem about the government in terms of minimum wage is it's transferring money from poor people to other poor people, right, in that sense. And that is one of the pernicious effects that government outsources its behaviour. So at the end of the debate, what we have a role of doing as the ACT Party is up front telling people the cost of government action. And for those reasons, we think that we should focus on those issues, not on issues of social reform, which are already in motion. For these reasons, we're proud to oppose.